I tend to think a lot and like I try to keep a long-term perspective on
Right.
things, think about a lot of like systems perspectives, a lot of cycles.
Yep.
I try to understand like large perspectives and how things can move in these cycles, and understanding where we might be at in a cycle can help me have a greater sense of peace and acceptance around things. And I often use, I think it's largely been attributed to Plato coming up with the concept of like thesis, antithesis, synthesis. A lot of people also use that model. And maybe he wasn't the first to originate it, but just saying he's often credited with that. And this idea of like synthesis being the ultimate, like this is where we can take these, well, starting with thesis, right? You have this idea or this like new thing that's kind of put out there. Often there will be a rejection, there will be a swing in the opposite direction of finding out what might be wrong with it, or people rejecting it, or being able to just poke holes and have a healthy criticism, and maybe it'll overcorrect and swing too far in the opposite direction, or maybe it's just healthy to be able to scrutinize something. But we have this antithesis where we kind of go against the thesis, right? Whatever this given idea might be. And then after time, you might poke holes in the holes that have been poked, right? And then you kind of recognize, oh, okay, well, here are ways to synthesize the holes and the criticisms that have come from that. Here are ways to make it a little bit more, to bring greater peace to it, to figure out ways to synthesize it. So then you come back around and it's this synthesis. And then ultimately, that synthesis then becomes the thesis of the next stage, where it's like, oh no, wait, there are ideas here that still need to be criticized. And so it becomes the antithesis. And up we go on this spiral, this endless cycle of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, thesis, antithesis, and this forever and ever, right? Turtles all the way down and all the way up. And we have that cycle, and for me it helps to have that long-term perspective. So bringing this back to your question, with psychedelics, I think we are in a bit of that cycle where like the 60s in like mainstream Western society, we had this huge bust around, this boom and bust around psychedelics, where it was heavy in research. It seemed like there was a lot of potential, there's a lot of fervor. It gets adopted into mainstream, and then the antithesis comes, that it becomes associated with the counterculture, and then it becomes this illicit thing, and it gets pushed into the dark recesses of the collective unconscious. And so we push it away, and we come up with Reagan and the DARE program and all of these like anti-drug education things, right? So that's the antithesis that we've been living in for a while. And now I feel like there's this resurgence, and people are calling it the psychedelic renaissance. And we're again starting to evaluate, well, maybe some of those holes that we were poking in the psychedelic idea, psychedelic revolution, maybe those holes weren't quite so accurate, or maybe we were too hard on those things, and let's reevaluate. So now it feels like we might be in a bit of a synthesis, where we're kind of bringing back in some of the benefits that we were initially seeing in the 60s before it was all outlawed in the 70s, and starting to recognize. But I think an important thing that's shifting, at least I'm hoping to see more of this in Western society around psychedelics, is that part of that synthesis and part of the plugging of those holes is that we're incorporating a lot of the indigenous wisdom around psychedelics that have existed forever. Like indigenous cultures all over the world have used psychedelics for time immemorial. Like this is not new in any facet of the society. Only in Western society where we're starting to like open up to this. And I think a lot of people in Western society, as part of the synthesis, we're starting to take some of that ancient teaching and indigenous teachings and being able to understand this more long-term perspective and build a healthier culture around it.